Hello, friend, and welcome to the Global Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Whitney Putnam, and I'm excited to spend the next 20 minutes with you because we're on a journey together. We're on a journey to not just get through this life, to not just be on autopilot, but to spend every single day living as fully and as well as we can as leaders. And that is really exciting because your leadership matters. I want to say it again. Your leadership matters so much. The choices you are making and the time you are investing in growing as a leader will pay dividends in your life and in the experience of the people around you. Today, we're talking with GLN President and CEO David Ashcraft about resilience. Honestly, sometimes I love the word resilience and sometimes I kind of hate it. Usually when I'm in the middle of a really challenging time that I just wish would end. This conversation will help you think about why resilience is actually necessary, the importance of celebrating small wins, and ensuring we have the right input in our lives to be resilient leaders. Before we jump in, take a second to hit your subscribe and like button so more people can find this community of curious, growth-minded leaders. And that way you'll never miss an episode. Okay, here's a conversation for you about staying resilient in the storms. Hey, David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Whitney. Always good to be with you. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We are getting to talk about resilience today, David. And one thing about these podcast episodes where we get to sit with you and our listeners get to lean into your wisdom is you just have decades of wisdom where you have handled a lot of these different leadership topics. So this is more of one of those like question and responses, questions we hear from listeners, and we just want to hear how you've navigated that journey. So resilience.
What you're telling me is I'm old. I've been around for a long time and have lots of experience. But thank you. You said it in a nice way, so I appreciate that.
You said that. We will not quote you on social media with that quote. Okay, David. As I was really thinking about resilience and leadership in general, I was thinking about all of our listeners in this community who tune into this podcast. They come to this for their resource where they want to get better. And there's a really good chance that most of those leaders are facing a really hard thing. Wouldn't you agree, David, just in your own leadership journey?
Very much so. I think we go into different situations and assume that if we're doing the right things, we assume if we're following God, we're not going to experience difficulty. And that's just not reality. It's going to happen. It's going to happen all the time. And so that's why this topic of resilience is so critical, because without it, we're not going to get anywhere in our professions.
Absolutely. And it just really did make me think, just like you just said, David, they might think they're not going to hit roadblocks. And yet that is life. The world that we live in has tons of roadblocks, whether it is in work itself, or it might be in our families or relationships or health or whatever it is. We're going to face it. And so I just wanted to say, even before we jump into this, if you're listening in your car, if you are on a walk, and I just want you to start framing as you listen to David's responses, what is the hard thing that you're going through right now? Just frame that up in your brain. So as David is processing out what resiliency looks like and feels like, you're actually naming the roadblock you're currently facing. So David, when listeners hear that word resilience, what reactions, you kind of named this, but what reactions do you think that they might have? You said, oh, I might not have roadblocks, but what other emotions does resilience bring up for our listeners?
Well, it's funny, Whitney, when you talk about resilience, it's not a word probably that I've used a lot. And the word for me so it depends on if it's detractors or people that like me. And so detractors would say, oh, he's stubborn. And yep. I like the word resilience better. I've probably always said determined is the word I like to use. And so I did some research. I got onto AI and I said, tell me the difference between resilience and stubbornness. And it was just kind of interesting. And I will back up and say, Ruth will tell me I'm stubborn. But again, I like to say, well, I'm just determined. And now I'll start saying resilient. That's a good word to have. And so looking at the two, they paint resilience in very glowing terms and they paint stubbornness in very negative terms, which I did not like because I'm not sure that they're as different or as separate as they tend to be. But an incredibly necessary trait if somebody's going to succeed in life, if they're going to succeed in leadership. And so something that we all need and we need to excel at.
Okay, this is so interesting. I love this reframe that you've given stubborn, David. This is fantastic. Everybody who's listening, who's always been called stubborn, is like, wait, there's good news for me. So you just said you're going to tell Ruth that you're just really resilient. But David, tell us how that, because now we don't know you like Ruth, like your wife, but tell us how that stubbornness or how that resilience has been you've had such a neat, incredible career of impacting thousands of people's lives. So how has that stubbornness, or let's say resilience, allowed for that leadership journey for you?
Well, if I go all the way back to when I was in my early 20s, while I was in grad school, Ruth and I ran a camp in Dallas, Texas, and it was essentially going to be closed. And they told us, if you want to live there for 6 months, you may live there, but we're going to close it and sell it. And so I just had worked in camps through college, had great, in my mind, great strategies, vision of how we could grow that camp. And so where stubbornness or resilience came into play there was the board was really ready to shut it down. And there were detractors on the board. There were detractors of former people that have been involved with that camp that said it'll never make it. And in my mind, and I stated it, I want to make this camp so profitable is not even the right word, but so vibrant that they would never think of selling it. And so was able to bring it to that point. And there were so many opportunities to bail out. We mentioned roadblocks that we hit, and we're going to hit those roadblocks. And so if we stop at the first or second or even the 30th or 40th roadblock, we're not ever going to get it done. And so there is that sense of I'm determined that I'm going to get through. Same thing when I came to the church that I pastored for 30-some years, LCBC. The first 5 or 6 years were brutal. And there were so many opportunities to bail out and quit. And without that resilience, my new word, or stubbornness, I don't think it ever would have happened because there were too many opportunities to bail. And probably, Whitney, what influenced me a lot in the early days, John Maxwell would always talk about people, he would talk about pastors specifically, because that's the world he originally came out of. And he'd say that typically a pastor will last about 2.5 years in their location. And the reason is they go to their new position and God has called them there. They prayed about it. The job opportunity came. Surely this is where God wants me. They start hitting resistance. And the assumption is with resistance, I must have misinterpreted the call to come here to this position. Mm-hmm. And it can happen in business too, where you pray about, you talk about, is this the business position I should have? And then you start coming up against difficulties and you assume, I must have misread something. This isn't where God called me. When the reality, he did. And so the way Maxwell would talk about it, he'd say, you've got storm clouds, you're in a thunderstorm, and all you see are the clouds above you. What you don't see, just a few minutes, hours away, is the edge of the storm, and the sun's going to come out, and we quit before we ever get to the edge. So I became very determined not to quit until the sun actually came out. So.
Okay. Well, so you just answered the next question I had, because so the people that are in the storm, I've been in the storm, you've been in the storm, and I was going to ask, how do you know? Because those roadblocks can sometimes last for a long time and you feel like there's not a way out. And you almost named it, and I'd love for you to expand on it a little bit more. You said, I'm going to keep at it until I see the sun come out. So I'm going to push through until I see the sun come out. So David, tell us a little bit more of that part of the journey of staying resilient until you actually see, like you said with that camp, I'm going to make it more vibrant. So you're waiting for an outcome of some sort is what I hear you saying.
Yeah, well, I think, Whitney, you definitely have to know what you're striving for. And so you've got an end in mind, E-N-D, in mind, where you say, this is where we're trying to go. And you've created a strategy. You've got steps that are going to help you get there. And so I was evaluating every step of the way. Are we making more progress? Are we getting closer to that end result that we're striving for? And every one of those were wins. And so you celebrate those wins. And the assumption is each one of those steps is moving you closer to that outside of the clouds, the sun is starting to shine. And the hard part is, in the middle of the storm, you don't feel like it's ever going to end. And you feel like it's going to go on and on and on. And I wish I could promise and tell people, you're always going to come through that storm. There always will be sun on the other side. But I would say from experience, I can't promise it, but from experience, that is true. And it's not just my personal experience in the things that I've led. It's pastoring tens of thousands of people that go through dark periods as well. And the sun does come out at some point. And so it's just maybe that's a perspective on God, perhaps, where I truly believe that God is going to bring us through those storms and he's going to walk us through those difficult times. But it's also reliant on past history for myself personally and other people saying the sun does come at some point.
Yeah. Gosh, I love both perspectives of that, both the spiritual side and the practical side of seeing it both ways, David. And I've heard you say too, and I think this frames up what you're saying is don't quit in the middle of the storm, which is what I want to do sometimes, is I just want to, it got so hard, it got so big. And sometimes some of our storms, David, we can't broadcast to the world, especially in leadership. Some of our storms are very personal. And so I know when you're working that through with God or a close group of friends, but then you still show up at work and want to do your very best. And so that is, I'm not misquoting you, right? I think you've said, do not quit inside the middle of the storm. And you've experienced that in your own life.
Very much so. And I've told the story before. When I was in grad school, I was having to study Greek and Hebrew both at the same time. And I'm not a linguist. I struggled deeply with it. Didn't even enjoy the experience. And so I was ready to quit and went and talked to one of my professors, Dr. Charles Ryrie, a theologian, family friend. And I remember it was a Wednesday night and I'm sitting in his living room and I'm just kind of whining and saying, I'm done. I can't do this. I'm not made out for it. I'm going to quit. And he listened to me very graciously, whine and complain. And at some point, once I seemed to slow down, then he just said, you know what, David, if you need to quit, quit. But he said, don't ever quit in the middle of a storm. And his challenge to me was get through the semester. Right now, you're feeling the heat. You're feeling the pressure of both trying to learn Greek and Hebrew, but get through the storm. And then once you're through the storm, once you get to the end of the semester, then you can make a decision then because your head will be more clear. You'll be able to see more about what's lying in front of you. And so go ahead, get through the semester. And then if you want to quit, you can quit. And that's been a Whitney for me, an underlying principle that has carried me through so many things. And so whether it was that camp experience, whether it was at LCBC, again, the church that I led, like I said, the first 5 or 6 years were incredibly tumultuous and there were so many opportunities to quit. But let's get through this storm. And again, I think a big piece of that is having a strategy, having things that you're working on so that you can see that you are making progress and you can see that you are winning along the way. And so for the church, we started with 150 people. Those first 5 or 6 years, we grew to about 600 people. So there were small wins along the way in spite of the difficulties we were going through. But the determination or the resilience was, let's get through the storm.
Or the stubbornness was.
The stubbornness. And there were people during that first 5 or 6 years that were not pleased with me, and they would have called it stubbornness at that time. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, and one thing too that, I just want to also say, because I keep thinking resilience, everybody is facing a hard thing. And so I love you, those of us that are listening, you framed up the hard thing you're listening to. And now David is saying, don't quit in the middle of that storm. And David, you've now said, okay, we'll set a couple of what's going to be the win for you, or what is the sun, coming out? What does that look like for you?
Will you even know? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Will you even know? And then, I've noticed this in my own leadership journey, and most of the time it's just because you learn from the fire and from the obstacle, is like how did you see your resilience muscles build through those different journeys, David, to give people hope that they can also build those muscles?
Well, I don't know that you even see them. I don't know that I saw them at the time, to be honest with you, Whitney, because each step of the way, you're just fighting for survival. You're fighting to see those steps and those gains that you're moving forward. I think it is real critical, though, to have some of those markers so that you can say, okay, I don't see the sun yet, but I know that we've moved from 150 to 300 people. We've moved to 400 people, 500, whatever it is. And each time you hit one of those markers, then it's like, okay, we're still in the storm, but we're seeing some good things happen. Or for us, it was about life change and working with other people. And as people's lives were being changed, you go, okay, everybody may not be happy with me right now, but these people, God is doing some amazing things in their lives. We are seeing some wins. And so I think that's real necessary. And in a business business context, it's going to be different than what it is in a church context. But I think the principle is make sure you got some markers where you can say, okay, we're making right strides and we're moving in a positive direction. And then the fascinating thing for Ruth and I, Whitney, was once we got through the storm, and it was about 5 or 6 years in, and I don't know that I could even tell you when the clouds parted or when the clouds were gone, but something just happened, and all of a sudden you kind of look back and go, oh, things are working now and it's going well. I didn't even realize the sun came out, but it did. And once it did, then Ruth and I said, why would we ever want to leave this situation? We're finally in the sun, it's shining, and if we go to a new location or a new place, then we're just probably gonna have to go through another storm again. And so let's stay and enjoy what's going on here right now. So
yeah, absolutely. David, this is so good as we just wrap up. And you've spoken so much to exactly where the leaders are, but as they're thinking about their next step, their next storm, what would your encouragement be for them? Just even today for what their next step needs to be?
Well, when I looked up the difference between resilience and stubbornness, Whitney, I mean, several things that it talks about, and it is very positive about resilience. And it just says there's a willingness to change. It's focused on the end result and making progress, which is, again, just taking those steps and having markers to show you're moving forward, being open to feedback. And so you have to be open to feedback. But I'd also say be careful who you're listening to, because a lot of your feedback is going to be very negative. That's why you're in this tough position. That's why you need resilience. And then it does talk about flexibility and being willing to bend without breaking. And I think that's real critical. And then AI gives then the negative, which it puts along with stubbornness. And it's just kind of clinging to the original plan and refusing to pivot. It says often rooted in the fear of being wrong, which that never was for me an issue. I always knew I was right. At least I thought I was right. And so determined to move forward. But it says somebody that's stubborn ignores feedback and believes there's only one way to do things. And some of those I go, yeah, that might be true. So it's still that fine line between stubbornness and resilience, but it is necessary for every leader. And if I were honest with you, and as I've watched young leaders grow, it's those that have the ability to be resilient that marks the difference between those that move forward and those that don't. And as I watch lots and lots of pastors start out in small churches, and you kind of go, what's the difference between those that make it and those that don't? I think it's that resilient piece of they believe enough in what they're doing that they're going to work their way through it, as opposed to those that just kind of shrink back with the difficult situations, and then they either move on or they just stop trying. So,
gosh. Well, David, I mean, now that is quotable. What you just said is that you've seen, because you have seen hundreds of pastors and you've seen hundreds of leaders. And if you're taking note that resiliency is really a key factor to people's success, and let's even just make it simpler than that it's just not giving up. Like if you still have that vision in your heart and you're not going to give up on it, that resiliency is the factor to really seeing those dreams achieved. So,
but that's got to come with a plan. So I also have watched people, though, that have a dream and they're determined to make that dream work, but they don't have a plan. And so they talk about it for years and years, and I'll get frustrated with those leaders and go, stop talking about it if you're not going to do something. And so that's what, I don't know what you'd call that. That's probably just a dreamer as opposed to resilience or stubbornness. And so you've got to have that plan and move so that you can tell if you're making progress or not. Otherwise, you're just dreaming and you're not really doing anything. So.
Yeah. And all the dreamers listening right now are like, gosh, he just read my mind. I've been saying that thing over and over. But listen, that's the thing. If you've been saying the thing over and over, let's say your New Year's resolution for the past 5 years has been XYZ, and you're still dreaming about it. David, you're absolutely right. They've got to start putting people around them. One thing I love that you said is the right feedback. In a world of 2026, our input is wild. Social media, news. So one thing I've seen you do really well is you've put that right group of people around you for feedback. And they're not yes people, but it's that right group, because you could have thousands of people of input. I've recently heard about a lot of people, and it's actually a next step I might be taking, is putting a board of directors around your own personal life. So you name a board of directors around your own personal life because you have personal dreams that you want to achieve, or health goals or physical goals, that you want to see realized. And so I love that emphasis of that accountability piece that you talked about, David, of putting the right people around.
And I think the right people is so important. Back when social media was just kind of kicking off, and I fell into a trap only for a couple of months of, as soon as I would preach a sermon and I was done with the weekend, I would look at social media to see what kind of responses I was getting. And if I was getting positive response, I thought, oh, this is a great weekend. If I didn't get positive response, I thought, oh, then this was a terrible weekend. And very quickly, I shut all that down and said, no, I've got to listen to the right people. And so for me, and people make fun of me all the time, I'm not on social media at all. I don't need to hear what anybody else says. I've got plenty of people that will speak into my life, but I don't need those that are free of accountability, taking shots at me, both positive or negative. I mean, you can listen to people in the positive that it warps your mind as well. So I'm not at all on social media, and I'm okay with people giving me, I'm resilient and probably stubborn now about the whole social media thing, and saying I'm not going to, because I don't need it, and I've got enough people speaking into my life without that. So
yeah, absolutely. You've put the right people around you, and your resiliency has allowed you, and I know it's been through obstacles, to impact thousands of people's lives. And I know that that's what really matters to you, David. And so thanks for sharing your wisdom so that we're going to get through the storms, guys. We could do it. And we're going to put the right people around us too. I think that's really important, David. I'm so glad that you mentioned that.
Yeah, right people and right process. Yeah. No, thank you, Whitney. Great talking with you.
Thanks so much. That conversation was so helpful to me. I'm going to be thinking about who is speaking into my life and influencing me, and whether they are the right voices to keep me resilient and on mission. So what's your takeaway today? Do you simply need the encouragement to stay strong during a storm? To wait for the sun to come out? Do you need to notice and celebrate the small wins you are experiencing in the middle of a really challenging season? Or do you maybe just need a nudge to be a little bit more like David? Honestly, a little bit more stubborn and determined, because you know your vision and your mission are so important to this world. Remember, like David said, so often the people who succeed are those who just simply don't give up. They keep going. Friend, I want to encourage you today. Your mission is so important. I know that hard times are going to come, or already have, because things that are worth doing are almost always hard. But you've got this. Be determined in your goals. Celebrate those small wins and keep going, my friend. Thanks for joining us today. And remember, everyone wins when the leader gets better.